Aboru, aboye, aboshishe. Orisha lifestyle is very complex, very vast. Got lots of parts, lots of moving parts. But there are some pillars, some fundamental building blocks or consistent themes and principles that cut across the entire practice. And those are some of the most important and elements of the practice because they are the most universal. But at the same time, because they're the most universal, it's oftentimes very difficult for people to slow down enough to actually define those elements in according to the first principles of Orisha lifestyle. For example, Olodumare is the supreme being, the cause and the source of everything that is Orisha lifestyle. People will acknowledge, I'm talking about devotees, will acknowledge and recognize the fact that we do believe in Olodumare. But then if you ask them to define Olodumare, what is Olodumare? And you start to listen very closely, you're going to start to hear them talk about Olodumare as if they're talking about the Christian God, or they're talking about the Islamic Allah, or they're talking about the Hebrew Yahweh, or something like that, right? And that is okay to the extent that the description is grounded in the theology of Orisha lifestyle. That is, if those attributes, characteristics, and the nature of Olodumare that a person is describing come out of the Oriki, come out of the praise names, come out of the Odu Ifa, then we know that there's an indigenous basis for how that attribute came about, right? Because when we say, for example, that Olodumare is the ever weeping king, right? That's an archetypal kind of an image. It evokes a kind of an understanding of someone who is powerful, but at the same time, in his power, is also compassionate and very concerned, right? So we personify these attributes of Olodumare to say he's powerful, but he's compassionate. Just by putting a gender onto it and these other kinds of attributes, emotional attributes, we see that we're personifying Olodumare, but we're doing so within the context. There's a story that tells why Olodumare is the ever weeping king. When we say that Olodumare is the Obaterere, the one whose mat spreads out across the universe, that's a praise name of Olodumare, but it comes out of Odu, Ifa. And then that Odu will have a story that contextualizes it and tells you the logic and the psychology for why Olodumare is the one who spreads his mat out infinitely across the universe, right? And so it's that logic and that psychology that reflects indigenous thought that makes Olodumare a particular entity and defines how you approach that entity properly, right? And not approach it with the name, the outer shell of Olodumare, but in your mind and in your heart, you're carrying an image of something else, right? Which is confusing. If you think of, again, personifying it as a relationship, if you have a romantic relationship and you are calling out to and physically approaching one person, but in your mind and in your heart, you're carrying the image of someone else, it's clearly going to be problematic at some point or another because they aren't the same. Right? Your expectations are not going to get met. All right? So it's very, very important that you go to the source, you get into the psychology, the indigenous psychology of Olodumare to understand what image you really, really ought to carry in your mind and in your heart, so that your expectations and your behavior will be congruent with the real patterns of creation according to Orisha lifestyle. And that whole process always, 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 always begins by asking Ifa. Aboru aboye, aboshishe.